Good morning, and thanks everybody for joining us for the roundtable discussion on broadband. It's great to see so many familiar faces on the roundtable today. You all clearly bring a different perspective to the conversation and different ideas about how we can address the issues about broadband. So we really appreciate you participating in the discussion. I know from having spoken to either you or some of your members, or in some cases associations recently, that broadband is an important issue for you all as well. So before we start today, I just wanted to give everybody an idea how we're planning to go through it. I think we'll start today by just giving an overview of DATCP's role in broadband in Wisconsin, and then some information on the Public Service Commission's actions in recent years. We'll also talk a little bit more about some of the items in Governor Evers' proposed budget regarding broadband. And then, we'd love to just, I think it's really valuable to listen to some of the feedback you all can provide about impacts and needs. It's a good opportunity to share those information. We want it to be a robust discussion, so please do feel free to chime in wherever you would like. I guess just to start us off, I'd like to provide some level setting on how DATCP's involved in broadband in our state. As Grace indicated on the front end, and Governor Evers mentions every time I've heard him talk about this, we can all agree by now that broadband is no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. And for our state's $104.8 billion agriculture industry, which occurs all over the state of Wisconsin, broadband tools, strong internet connections is a really important tool to have. Even for those who aren't farming, broadband access is a critical need, especially now that events and meetings are held online. Students are doing homework remotely, and even in instances where students are in class, they've got homework at home too, and they need to have that connection. People work from home. Sometimes seniors need it to schedule or attend medical appointments. It's a different world these days. The list goes on, and the point is that broadband's a need to have, not a nice to have. So Jaron McCallum's with us with the Public Service Commission. He's the state broadband director, and he's going to talk a little bit more about broadband expansion. That's within the purview of the Public Service Commission. But also, I wanted to just do a little connecting of the dots with the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection. We are cognizant of the importance of mentioning the TCP in DATCP. Clearly, agriculture is a spotlight, as I mentioned, with the importance of the agriculture industry. But Trade and Consumer Protection has a role as well, we've helped collect input and share information on PSC's efforts to expand and improve broadband. PSC Chair Becky Vach and Jaron have spoken to our DATCP board about the intersections between our agencies. So before we get to talking about what Jaron will cover with the expansion that Governor Evers has proposed, I also wanted to share that in the budget, and this is the CP portion of it, the governor has proposed a set of broadband-related consumer protections that would be enforced by DATCP. These include things like protecting people from being denied service based on race or income, requiring service providers to give notice of planned rate increases or changes to broadband speed, and requiring providers to follow certain minimum service standards. So these protections would make sure that consumers have broadband access regardless of where they live, and would provide a framework for providers to compete in. So we're appreciative of the fact that the governor has recognized the consumer aspects while still making the commitment to invest in the actual service. Just for reference, DATCP's Bureau of Consumer Protection has received about 700 complaints about telecommunications services in each of the last 5 years, and that category includes broadband complaints. So clearly these protections are important and necessary and timely. So we're looking forward to working with the governor and the legislature to implement those proposals. And we want to make sure that people are aware of these consumer protections that are included as well. So now that I just kind of shared a little bit about what is involved from DATCP's perspective on the consumer role, I'm just going to turn it over to Jaron so he can talk a little bit more about some of the things the PSC has done before, and then we'd love to just kind of get everybody's perspectives afterwards. Jaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Romanski. Happy to be here with everyone. The Public Service Commission and myself certainly really appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's roundtable. So as was mentioned, my name is Jaron McCallum. I've been serving in the role of State Broadband Director for just over a year now at the PSC. In total, I've been with the PSC and Wisconsin Broadband Office, which is housed within the PSC, since about 2015. So I've actually been with the PSC for longer than my time that I've been serving in the role of State Broadband Director. But the Wisconsin Broadband Office's vision is really such that all Wisconsinites have the information technology capacity needed to fully participate in society. And within that vision, I would say that our mission is to make high-performance broadband more accessible, resilient, competitive, and affordable in Wisconsin. So the PSC, the Wisconsin Broadband Office, we're very committed to equitable access to broadband across the state. And we know that high-performance broadband is essential, as Secretary Romanski referred to, it's essential for society, for health, the economic development of our state. I really like to say that broadband is truly a catalyst for vibrant communities. This gets stated a lot, but it does things like bridging the rural-urban divide, help students of all ages access learning opportunities, increases economic development and tourism, increases access to healthcare, increases participation in government and society, supporting agriculture, manufacturing, and really I could go on and on. The list is in my mind, infinite. The ways that broadband can really improve Wisconsinites, Wisconsin community prosperity. Again, it's really endless in my mind. And I know it bears repeating, or it gets repeated often, but broadband is truly now an essential service. So having said all that, we do know that there are far too many Wisconsin residences, businesses that lack access to minimum speeds of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And even further than that, we know that many also struggle with the cost and the affordability of this essential service. So as was alluded to, I'm going to kind of provide some overviews of some of the key programs, tools, activities that PSC and WBO have been working on and focused on over the past couple of years. And then I'll kind of turn it over and talk a little bit about Governor Evers, some of his budget proposals affecting broadband. So to start, I'm going to kick it off with a longstanding program that the PSC and WBO have been administering. Hopefully, folks are mostly aware. We have our Broadband Expansion Grant Program. And the goal of that program is to expand telecommunications infrastructure in underserved and unserved areas of the state. And really where this program kind of fits in is we know that there are areas of the state that are just difficult to serve from a population density standpoint, from a topography standpoint, and the grant program can really help providers and communities make that business case for expansion feasible in those areas of the state. So to date, since about 2014, the program has awarded 268 grants totaling just over $72.5 million in grants awarded. And I think it should be stated that the grant program has actually been quite competitive to date and oversubscribed to date. And we know that almost always, every time we have a grant round or a grant cycle, we've received requests for funding that are far in excess of the available funds that we've got to award in that particular grant round. So over the years, we've awarded a wide range of grants to a wide range of recipients, requesting grants as small as a few $1,000s to millions of dollars, and projects that have employed various technologies like fiber, cable, fixed wireless, et cetera. So we've really awarded a pretty wide range of grants over the program's existence. And Actually, just a few weeks ago, we just made recent awards for our fiscal year 2021 grant cycle, where we awarded $28.4 million in grants to 58 projects impacting unserved and underserved areas of 44 counties. And the great thing about the program is that, it really promotes public-private partnership and matching dollars. And that $28.4 million leveraged $49.2 million in private and local matching dollars. So the grant program is quite successful in leveraging other dollars as well to help drive infrastructure into those areas of the state that really need it most. Beyond the grant program, the PSC has been staffing and administering the governor's task force on broadband access. On July 14th of last year, 2020, Governor Evers signed Executive Order 80, creating the governor's task force on broadband access. And the goal of that group, it's a 25-member group, broad representation. The goal of that group is to advise the governor and legislature on broadband actions and policy, strategies to successfully expand high-speed internet to every business, residence, institution in the state, looking at initiatives for digital inclusion, and pathways to really unlocking and optimizing all the benefits of statewide affordable access to broadband for all the communities in Wisconsin. And the real kind of work report coming out of that group, obviously we've been meeting over the past, since the executive order was signed, we've been meeting, having subcommittee meetings, but the work product that'll be coming out of that is a report that'll be due by June 30th of this year. So folks can stay tuned on that. We're really excited, putting forth some recommendations that can hopefully help ease the issues that the state is experiencing to help, again, increase access, affordability, and adoption of broadband services. Another area that the PSC has been quite involved with over the years, actually, even going back 5, 6, 7 years, the office has always been very focused on maps and broadband data. So broadband mapping, again, is an area where we have made improvements, but we still need to see further improvements. We're always striving to have the most accurate, timely broadband map that we can. It's really critical to drive limited resources into the areas of the most need. So we're always hoping and working towards getting our Wisconsin broadband map and other broadband mapping tools as accurate and timely as possible, so citizens, decision makers, et cetera, can be best informed when they're looking at how to allocate those finite resources. A little bit beyond that, the office is beginning to get more involved and more focused on digital equity and inclusion framework. And we know that availability of broadband alone is really not enough to solve the problem. We need, targeted strategies for internet adoption, device access, digital literacy, and affordability, again, are really all key components of that greater vision. And then just another note that the office and the PSC has been focused on of late is really kind of this role of partnership and capacity building. I think we see the broadband office as kind of as a leader in this area and really kind of operating as a spoke and hub model and really kind of helping to move the greater vision forward. There's a lot of partners and many of them are on the line, a lot of interested and engaged stakeholders in this area. So we're trying to coordinate those efforts as best we can. And one of those, a big one, obviously, of late has been the COVID-19 response. We've stood up an emergency broadband resources webpage where we listed many internet service providers across the state had special programs or discounts, et cetera, as a result of the pandemic. So we've mapped out and listed all those programs to the best extent possible so consumers could access that. We stood up a phone and internet helpline specifically dedicated to consumers calling in and having access to someone that they can talk to and get information on accessing internet in their area or accessing low-income discount programs, et cetera. We mapped out Wi-Fi locations across the state. We also awarded CARES Act infrastructure grants, and we did a lot more beyond that. But in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic response, that has been a big initiative and effort over the past year. Beyond that, another exciting initiative that wrapped up at the end of 2020 was our partnership with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, where we had our Broadband Connectors pilot program. And that program was aimed at providing technical assistance to local units of government, school districts, tribal or indigenous nations, helping them access, whether it be federal dollars, state dollars, navigating how to pull together stakeholders at the local level, doing things like surveys or data work and beyond, and really kind of helping from a staffing standpoint, helping those communities. And we had great interest in that program. We had a application window that was 9 days long, and we had 96 applications put forth. We had the capacity to select 6 of those, but I think that was a really successful program to help those communities, again, with that local technical assistance. And it really spoke to the need. Oftentimes we hear from town board officials or county administrators, various locally elected officials, and they're looking for help on how to navigate these waters in terms of expanding broadband within their communities. So that was another recent effort and initiative that I think highlighted the need and also was quite successful. Beyond that, we continue to support our Broadband Forward and Telecommuter Forward community programs, which are, again, aimed at voluntary programs aimed at streamlining administrative procedures or, in the case of Telecommuter Forward, promoting telecommuting options within that community. So with that, I want to be mindful of time here, but I'm gonna run through some of Governor Evers' broadband-related proposals in his 2021-2023 executive budget, and then I think I can turn it back over after that. But I'm gonna go through this. So one of the highlights of Governor Evers' proposal, actually, let me take a step back. So the governor obviously has made an investment, a total investment in broadband access and affordability, roughly $200 million over the biennium, which would nearly quadruple Wisconsin's investment of about $54 million in the 2019-2021 biennium. And kind of a main component of that proposed expansion of funding is about $150 million into the broadband expansion grant program that I spoke about earlier. And that grant program, again, has been very oversubscribed and competitive to date. So I think that is a great step to help expanding infrastructure in areas of the state that need it most. Beyond that, the governor has proposed reducing roadblocks for local municipalities within communities considered unserved and underserved to provide broadband service to their residents. Beyond that, it would allowing electric cooperatives to use easements to hold and install and maintain broadband infrastructure and lease and provide that excess capacity to broadband providers and suppliers across the state. Another proposal would be creating a broadband planning and leadership grant program to support Wisconsin communities develop their own plans to expand broadband access to their residents. And I think that ties in quite well with that PSC-WEDC partnership that I spoke about earlier, where we've seen firsthand that great need of local technical assistance. Another proposal within the governor's budget proposal is creating an internet and assistance program that would invest $40 million in reducing the cost and making internet services affordable for tens of thousands of low-income families throughout Wisconsin. And again, availability is important, but again, it goes further than that. Affordability is very much an area that needs improvement and across the state. And this internet assistance program would go a long ways to helping folks access the internet. The proposal also is proposing creating a broadband line extension grant program, which would reduce the cost of expensive line extensions from residences to existing broadband infrastructure. Oftentimes we hear from consumers, they've got, fiber or some sort of wired solution in, within 100 yards, 200 yards, and they need that line extension. And this grant program would help fill that need. It would provide some financial incentive to the provider to make that extension up that long driveway or down that road, whatever it might be, to help connect folks that might otherwise not have that connection. Beyond that, the proposal would maintain funding for the Teach Subsidy Program and the Teach Infrastructure Grant Program, which reduces the cost of internet access for libraries and educational institutions across the state. Of course, there's the broadband consumer protections, customer protections that Secretary Romanski spoke about. And then last but not least, the proposal puts forth broadband granular mapping data requirements to, again, really help drive these investments that we have into the areas of most need to help fill those areas that are unserved and then go beyond there. So broadband mapping data is certainly an important component of that. So with that, I would, I'd welcome conversation on any. I just covered a lot, but I'd be happy to welcome conversation on any of that. But I'll turn it back over to Secretary Romanski. Thank you.
Thanks, Jaron. I know you covered a lot of ground there, and that's much appreciated. When the governor rolled out his budget, he had indicated that broadband expansion was going to be a major priority for him. So thanks for walking through all those specifics of what that $200 million looks like. I guess I'd just like anybody to jump in and share. I mean, the one thing that kind of comes to my mind, and I've heard a little bit of this as I've spoken to you or your groups, is what is the broadband access like in your area currently, and what kinds of things do you think would connect to what some of the things Jaron just talked about, or you or your members? Anybody want to jump in first?
I can lead off, Mr. Secretary. This is Dan Smith, President and CEO of Cooperative Network. Thinking about that, one of the challenges that our cooperatives have across the state is just as they continue to grow and merge and expand their territory, it's really not your father's cooperative anymore. We all know about precision agriculture and the demands that places on broadband, but just the geographical expansion of the service area. One of our farm cooperatives that's heavily in the farm supply business, so we're talking about actually getting out on the farm and putting on materials, fertilizer and spraying and such, from their southernmost plant in Wisconsin to their northernmost plant is a 2.5-hour drive. So they have that amount of area to cover every day. So it is essential that for internal communication, planning, monitoring, changing weather conditions so they can, at the last moment divert application equipment to another area if it happens to be raining on one side, that instant communication is absolutely essential. And one of our largest cooperatives, Land O'Lakes, estimates that they touch in some degree 1 out of every 3 acres of farmland in the United States. It may be through seed or through marketing or through fertilizer. So they are very actively building a internal communication and management plan that is, based on broadband, that can link all those acres together so that now you can really zero in on, nutrient retention, analytics for financials for farmers. And then once you have that type of a database, making sure that all the supporting industries around agriculture, and like at Cooperative Network, we represent 12 different sectors. Agriculture is our biggest, but we also have insurance and finance and energy co-ops, all of those which serve agriculture. The common denominator for success in the future for all of those has to be broadband. It has to be the communication, the sharing of knowledge, the management tools that are needed under precision agriculture. So it's essential for us that we move forward with this.
Thanks for sharing, Dan. Anybody else have any thoughts about service in your area or the kinds of things that need to be done to make that connectivity more of a reality?
If I may, Mr. Secretary, Joe Ruth with the Wisconsin Towns Association, and I'd like to focus to answer that on some of the technical help that Jaron mentioned earlier that's been proposed in towns throughout Wisconsin, and really anyone who's trying to bring broadband to their area, whether it's a town, different municipality, county, or school district. that technical help is truly needed. And I would say it's, it's probably as important as the funding itself. Much of rural Wisconsin, much of towns in Wisconsin, many of them have literally no administrative help. They may not have an administrator or even a town employee outside of their road crew. So this often ends up being on the elected officials, on the town supervisor, and often on the town clerk as well. And they're very capable people. Certainly we have great local officials in the state of Wisconsin, but they don't have those connections to the industry, and they don't have that professional grant writing experience and so forth. So some of the programs that Jaron mentioned, like the technical assistance pilot program, but as well as some of the things in the governor's proposal, like grants for leadership, the leadership grant program. And I believe there was also, broader than broadband, but a grant resource team as well to help with writing some of these grants. So those programs, from our perspective, are so essential in helping our local officials actually make this a reality.
Thanks, Joe. Mark, do you find some of your members have similar kinds of issues?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, no question about it. I mean, we're arguably probably have more resources than most of the towns. Yet at the same time, when you look at rural Wisconsin, we have faced the same kinds of challenges. I've often argued that in today's new millennium knowledge technology-based economy, having broadband access is no guarantee of economic success. But in this current economy, not having it is pretty much a guarantee you're not going to have success. So the attention we're putting on this, I think, is well-founded if we want to position our state for future success, not just our metro areas, but all of Wisconsin. And to that end, Jaron, when you were speaking about some of the numbers, I guess I have a question for you. Given what the governor has advanced in the budget, and given your experience with the programs and the desire for assistance far exceeding your capacity to provide, what's the estimate as to what would be needed if we were going to satisfy everyone's desires?
Are you speaking from a connectivity or technical assistance?
Well, so we have the federal government talking about putting $100 billion into broadband. We have our governor, $200 million in the proposed budget. We have the state of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, putting $450 million into broadband access, rural broadband access. If we were going to address the problem, what dollar amount do we think we would have to allocate toward this challenge?
That's a challenging question to answer. Obviously, the governor has proposed $200 million. There's other kind of federal programs at play as well here, and we're always trying to be mindful of combining and leveraging those various state dollars, federal dollars, and having them work in conjunction as best as possible. We know that the FCC estimates that there's about 400,000 locations that are lacking that access to 25.3. Again, they're using census block mapping, so we know that estimate is probably on the low end. So we know that it's probably more than that, but putting an exact dollar amount to how much that would cost is a very difficult proposition. Again, this ties into the broadband mapping and granular data components of the governor's budget. Really having access to that granular data would give us a better understanding of where precisely these areas are of most need, and whether that's addresses or road segments. That would go a long way to help kind of hone in on where these areas exactly are. We have a good idea, but it's difficult to pinpoint precisely where these areas are of most need, just because that granular mapping data is lacking. So that's a really important component of the proposal as well. So it's a very difficult question to come up with an answer to. So I apologize about that, but I guess I don't have a great estimate for you. It's a little bit on the spot there.
Thanks, Jaron. And Mark, good question too. So actually, I was going to ask you, have you heard any kind of industry estimates, estimates, from your world that would kind of lead to some generalizations, at least, about what the need is out there?
Well, so I think the telcos in our state do an excellent job, and they're in business for a reason. It's a business. They're not in the business of charity. So I completely understand why we're not going to spend $10 to lay a line on which there's going to be $1 payback over a 20-year period. Completely get that. That's why we have to be more creative or add more dollars to the effort to make it cost effective. Now, if the line were already there and the end consumer is paying their $1 a year and the entity laying the cable did not have to put the dollars up to lay it, or if we used, I'll just to use a hard example, if we use the Motorola node system and government created that and had the end user still consume the product provided by the telco, but we just provided the transport to get there with government infusion of dollars. Now we've got some effort, but of course the challenge is of course, where does government get that money for that to create that transport? Well, the PSC is doing really good work in that area. If we pass the latest $2.5 trillion proposal, then we're talking about either $1 to $200 billion nationwide, which means for Wisconsin, since we're basically 2% of everything, $2 to $4 billion of available capital to create that transport. So we have end users having access to ISP, internet service providers. That would seem to me, it would go a long way. And that was kind of my question. I fully understand Jaron's answer. We really don't have an answer, but $4 billion would get us closer to the paradise we're seeking than we are now. So I don't really have a good answer for you. I respect the telcos as well, where they're not necessarily interested in sharing a lot of information about where holes are in service. If I were a business, I might be a little protective of that too. So I respect them, and I'm not criticizing them at all. But it does lead to kind of an incomplete map in the hands of PSC.
Thanks, Mark. Julie, before when we were talking, Jaron was talking about reducing roadblocks and incentives for service extensions. I saw you nodding your head. So do you have some examples locally where you're hearing from your members about the quality of their service and what might need to happen in order to get that service to them?
Well, sure. If they didn't have problems before that they recognized, they sure did this last year, right? Kids on Zoom. And I mean, we experience it seriously every single day on staff because we have remote, employees, right? Wheeler and Amherst and all over the state, right? And so I literally see it every single day with poor internet, poor broadband access. But I can tell you a story just about some members. For example, Farmers Union has a lot of independent farmers, a lot of smaller farmers, and a lot of folks are really interested in developing local food sheds, and with a lot of direct marketers who depend completely on internet to be able to do direct marketing, whether it's beef or lamb or whatever. But we have some members who are really interested in developing a fiber shed. And one particular member is up in Price County. And a fiber shed really would be a regional effort to highlight wool production, hemp production, local dyes, artisans that are using natural fibers in order to produce it. And there's a ton of interest. I mean, this is a booming area. I'll just try to buy a beautiful skein of artisan wool, and you know what I mean. But their barrier is they don't have internet access. And so our member, for example, that I'm thinking of, was invited to a huge conference, and she was a major speaker that was going to be there, and she is up in Price County. And she could not participate in the same way as the other speakers because she has poor broadband service and just could not get in from her home during this last year. And so that is just like highlighting one disparity. It's that last mile in many cases, right? So we're really glad to hear the governor's budget is addressing some of those technical assistance barriers that exist for townships and farms, but also really trying to use small businesses and cooperatives in particular to create the highway that will get us to that last mile. It's critical. And so we're very glad to see that it's addressed both at the state and the federal level, and you'll be sure you can see our members out there advocating during the civic engagement opportunities this spring.
Thanks for sharing, Julie. Ashley, I know from talking to Tom Bressner frequently and to WABA members recently that this is an issue that's come up as well. And given the breadth of where the association's members are there certain parts of the state that the association is found has got a better pot of service, or are you kind of seeing needs across the board?
I would say it's just across the board. If you're located in a town or a city, your broadband is obviously much better. But as soon as you get off a main road, and I'm in northern Wisconsin, as soon as you get off a main road or get out of town, your options are greatly diminished. And the speed of which those options function is very, very slow. And to kind of echo what Julie was saying, in the western side of the state, we have a lot of small businesses, a lot of farm direct, they want to market. And I was speaking to an individual who is trying to get her business up and running. They are in the goat processing and raising. And she said the same thing. She goes, it's online. Everything is online. I have a hard time doing research. I have a hard time creating and uploading my website, doing any type of social media. That's how she reaches her customers, establishes a base. And all of that she's unable to do it from her home. She has to travel to town in order to get reliable internet. And also our businesses, if we have some of our members are not located on the edge of town, they're located out in the country, and if their internet goes down, it's tied into many of their operational, from billing, their inventories, their entire system. If they don't have internet, it all goes down and they can't share that information. They can't do billing. It's just very critical to their business. And for us, satellite internet, it's very unreliable up here. So it's definitely a struggle. And I am very grateful for the grants that we are getting and the attention that this is drawing from our local, state, and federal governments. But I do feel like this broadband is more of, it needs to be treated like utility, right? Like electricity. Everybody needs to have the access to it. And I think that's the route we're going to need to put emphasis on, is getting it out to everybody.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. Now, Shane, I know we've connected on Zoom enough to know that you must have a pretty decent connection up in your area. Any idea what the secret is, or are you fortunate to have a part of the state that's got some pretty good service, or what are you hearing from your members?
Sure, thanks, Secretary. I am truly blessed and fortunate that I have a forward-thinking cooperative in TCC that has been on the leading edge of technology for years. And in our area, where I sit, I have fiber going through, our property, and I have a cell phone tower in between our house and the shop. I always feel guilty at times. I feel, it's heart-wrenching. Ashley, I'm probably thinking about the same person that you were talking to or about, and that they cannot run their business. And there's times where I feel guilty that I am so fortunate, having broadband and cell service. It puts me in the driver's seat. I can choose where I want to do business. I can, if I want to hop on the internet, if I want to order parts out in the field or whatever, I'm fortunate. So I have, Dan, thank you for the cooperative that we have. That is absolutely, that's what's making our business, successful. But, and Jaron, one question I had for you is, in the budget, is this going to be focused on new construction or upgrading areas that are a little bit, suspect right now? Because my feeling is rural America, if we're going to keep rural America viable for the next generation, we need to have the next generation to want to live in rural America. And with the needs that we see with rural broadband, the next generation is going to be looking for that much more, and that's going to dictate where they want to live in the future. So, and that's really scary for me, because that's going to be a high priority, as it should be. So
yeah, thanks for that question, Shane. I would say the grant program primarily is focused on, expanding new infrastructure, whether that be, like I said, that could be fiber, it could be cable, could be fixed wireless service, it could be a number of different technology mediums. But I would say primarily we're focused on that new infrastructure expansion into those unserved areas of the state. There is a priority factor within our grant program set forth in statute that prioritizes those areas that are deemed unserved. So that is a priority factor that we look at amongst many. But there are also times where a grant could potentially go towards upgrading existing infrastructure as well. There's infrastructure in the ground that was built, decades ago that needs upgrading. So, that could certainly be a part of it, as well as upgrading existing infrastructure. But I would say primarily the grant program is focused on new infrastructure expansion. But I hear you absolutely. The keeping folks in rural areas of the state and that broadband is so critical to help draw and keep folks in those areas of the state. So absolutely.
And I think, Julie, you said it best, is it's the last mile. I can go 2 miles from here, and I have a person that works with me, their spouse can work easily from home with the comfort of reliable internet, and you go 2 miles away and there's zero service. So it's, and I said, what would they do if they were forced to work from home? And they wouldn't be able to. You can only go to McDonald's Wi-Fi so long to do your work. So yeah, it's like rural broadband is as important as electricity was 100 years ago. And so thank you, Secretary.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Shane. And I know, so this one will be for both Bob and Adam. I know from talking to either you or some of your members that sometimes even getting a cell phone call to some parts of the state can be a challenge. And I don't know what you're seeing with your business or your members in that regard with their service, their broadband service.
Well, Secretary Romanski, this is Adam. Thanks a lot for pulling together this call. I think as Organic Valley, we sit in a little bit of a unique space. Both we're a marketing cooperative, right? And we have about 750 employees in the state. And this past year, all were working at home, other than a few on-site frontline workers. So for us, as making a marketing cooperative function and work, I mean, some people talk about small businesses. Well, we're maybe a little bit bigger than small businesses, but we really did face a challenge making sure everyone had connectivity, and our IT team did the best they could do, but there's definitely gaps that were still there. And so we still had a handful of folks that would come into the office. On the farmer side of it, we have about 500 farmer members throughout the state. And you're right, residing in the cool area of Wisconsin, we have a lot of farmers here. In every nook and cranny, we seem to have a dairy farm, which is a challenge both for cell phone service, but also, as you suggest, rural broadband access. And it extends not only to our engagement with them and their ability to connect with our farmer base, but farmer members this last year with the pandemic. And I see the Farm Service Agency and a lot of the services provided through DATCP gravitating to more online options, right? That instead of going to the local FSA office, what you're doing is applying through those portals. And if you don't have that, you're set at a disadvantage. So both for a worker base for us that's based in rural America, predominantly right now, expanding broadband, as the governor has provided in the budgets, is a real key. And also for our farmer members who want to thrive and to have access to the farm programs and assistance that everyone else would, as they have in the past. I think it's gonna be imperative. Dan spoke to it as cooperatives. I mean, we're part of a co-op network, they've been a champion, especially last year, working on this in the last biennium and again this biennium. So it's places that we're hoping to continue to be active. So thanks for having us.
Thanks, Adam. And Bob, I see you came off mute there too.
Well, you know, again, thank you, Secretary Romanski, for having me on here today on behalf of the Soybean Association. We're faced with the same things everybody else is discussing. Sometimes I'm shocked. I'm talking to somebody in Jefferson County and they're having challenges. You know, it's always not that person that you think is way far out there. It's somebody that's, you know, what we might even consider a suburban, rural kind of an environment close to the city of Milwaukee, and they can't connect. That's frustrating. We've done a lot of virtual sessions this winter, and they were successful, but we had many that just could do audio, you know, and that was, you know, we had a lot of participants, but it was very frustrating for them that they could only connect by audio. So that was a challenge, but thank you for this.
Great, thank you. Well, this is helpful, and I'm glad we're recording this because I've been trying to take notes and keep up with the things that you're sharing, because what typically happens is I use these things. So in my conversations with legislators, we're meeting a lot with legislators now because it's budget season, and clearly with the investments the governor's made in broadband comes up in all those meetings. So this is helpful. I've been trying to kind of take notes on some of the things you all have been referencing because it's great background information for me. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share?
I'd just like to second what Shane was saying about, you know, looking towards the future, what our rural communities will look like. I think we've all gone through such a year of significant change in how we do business, how we communicate. Obviously, you know, I've heard estimates as much as 30 to 40% of the workforce may not return to a full-time office environment. So that's going to put more demand on, you know, on our broadband services. It's going to allow people to choose where they want to live more than they did in the past as far as how they commute and how they communicate. But what we really stress over this last year, and I think what we've really learned, is how important broadband is to three things. That's cooperation between all of our businesses, building communities, and then building communication channels. If we can successfully do that in the future, I think we have a chance to really revitalize rural Wisconsin and the rural Midwest. So it's kind of making lemonade out of lemons, but sometimes that's what you have to do. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Really good link to something that I may not have mentioned previously, but the governor's blurb and commission on rural prosperity. One of their primary recommendations early and often was improving broadband service as a key criteria, key component of making sure that rural prosperity continues to be not just a thought, but a reality. Thanks for making that link between those items. Much appreciated.
Mr. Secretary,
anybody else have anything they'd like to share?
Yeah, this is Mark.
Go ahead, Mark. Yep, sorry.
I think one of the things that, one of the frustrations we have at the local level, one thing that's holding us back as a state and as locals, is an uncertainty of the various technologies. And I'll phrase it this way. We may have some locals that may be willing to invest some dollars in the broadband access issue, but we're not necessarily knowledgeable enough to say, well, should we invest dollars in fiber? Because maybe the Elon Musk is going to put the satellites up, and will we have wasted dollars because that's coming next year? Or is the Amazon Kuiper project really going to take hold? And so we shouldn't do this. We're almost paralyzed by the what ifs. And to have knowledgeable people, let's say at the state level, that are maybe holding the hands of the private sector people that are living and breathing this on a daily basis, that could be helpful, so that provides some comfort level at the local level, town, village, city, county, and quite frankly, maybe even state, so that when we expend whatever, 200 million or 2 billion, that we are moving in a direction that we're assisting our rural communities. Now, I think we have to accept the fact that whatever technology we're using, there's going to be something better in 10 years. Whatever computer we're on right now, there's a better one coming up this fall. So if you're always waiting for that better one, you are always waiting, and you're never going to have a computer. If we're always waiting for that best, the optimal, the pinnacle of broadband rural access, we'll always be waiting for that. So, but a knowledge base at the state level that provides comfort at the local level, the dollars expended on whatever it might be, the lane of fiber, the grant dollars to telcos so they build out, dollars to the Motorola node network, whatever it might be, that we have some comfort that we're moving in a good direction. That would be helpful.
So,
Thanks.
Mr. Secretary,
Thanks, Mark.
I'd just like to add one little thought here.
Sure.
The estimate is there's 25% of rural Wisconsinites that lack access to high-speed internet, but that is even worse for rural Indigenous communities. And I would just like to underscore that number goes up to about 60%. So I'm glad that Jaron talked a little bit about the importance of making sure that support goes to tribal and Indigenous nations. And I just wanted to make sure that we're underscoring that the problem is, exacerbated depending on that zip code as well. So.
Thanks, Julie, for bringing that up. That's clearly a priority of the governors as well. And Mark, back to your question. Great point, because there's no one person who can have all of that information available. Jaron, I guess I'll ask this question. Do you have staff that can field questions like that and or find resources to try to help bridge that gap a little?
Yeah, that's certainly, obviously, it's an area of great need, and we certainly understand that. And we do have, at this point in time, limited staff, limited capacity to help in that way, because as I spoke about the pilot program that we had, there was 96 applications, and over that short window we had the capacity to help 6 communities, and that can be a pretty involved process at certain times to help those communities. It's certainly worthwhile time, but it does take staffing. So we do have limited capacity at this point, but it definitely speaks to the importance of the governor's proposal of providing that technical assistance help. But I absolutely hear there's a number of emerging technologies at play that are becoming part of the equation to consider, and I could understand where that would be a challenge at the local level, kind of figuring out which path is best to take. So I absolutely hear you.
Great, thank you. So I want to be cognizant of everybody's time here, since we're getting close to the top of the hour. Is there anything that we may have missed, or does anybody else have anything else to share? Joe, I see you came off mute.
Yeah, if I could, I guess I have 2 very quick points. One, following up on Mark's point on that hesitancy. I think that is even more so an important conversation in a year like this, where we're talking about a huge increase in funding and trying to figure out how we prioritize short-term needs versus long-term needs. So certainly trying to figure out, in the long term, which is going to be the better technology. Is fiber going to have a better capability than satellite or however else? But then also recognizing that even if we can make that decision, is it worth still investing in some shorter term needs to kind of bridge the gap while we figure that out? So I think that complicates that analysis quite a bit, but it's still important. And the last point that I would make is, as we're talking on prior comments, as we're talking about encouraging growth in rural areas, which is so important. I think everyone recognizes that on this call. We often talk about schools and work from home and industry and all of that, because that has been highlighted so much by the pandemic. And it's true. All of that is so important. One other piece that I think doesn't get mentioned enough, so I just wanted to bring it up, is telehealth. and how important that is to rural Wisconsin, especially to all of Wisconsin, but to rural Wisconsin especially. There was a quote I saw, I believe it was from Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia a month or two ago, in a letter to the FCC on broadband. He noted that from 1999 to 2017, so pre-pandemic, we had already been seeing a doubling of the mortality disparity between rural Wisconsin and urban Wisconsin. And part of that is because of, I think, probably the age and the population that is in rural Wisconsin, but some of it is likely also due to the scarcity of health options, of hospitals and doctor's office in the more rural areas. And so telehealth certainly could be such a huge growth there in helping draw people in to rural Wisconsin.
Mr. Secretary, I guess maybe one closing comment. It seemed maybe the solution is more obvious than maybe it's right before us. What is it we really need to solve this problem? I guess we need a Starbucks every 100 feet and a Marshall force of 12-year-olds to show us how to use everything. That would solve it all.
Thanks, Mark. Always good to have the light moment in there too. But Joe, also a great point about telehealth. I mean, as when I was doing my lead-in, I was talking primarily just from an economic and agriculture standpoint and rural health and prosperity. Part of rural economic health and prosperity is health, and the telehealth option is really vitally important. So I'm glad you were able to add that in. Well, I just wanted to, as we're up against the hour, I just wanted to thank everybody for your willingness to participate in this. It's really important for all of us to hear, from all of you. I appreciated Jaron being on as well, and really clearly laying out what the governor has put forward in his priorities for rural broadband service. It's generally speaking, when I speak of it, I talk about historic investment, $200 million, and including improving service and quality across the board. But I think Jaron was able to, he helped me kind of better understand what exactly that means with some of the provisions that are included in. And it's clear that you all have a solid feel for where your members and your organizations are and what you're seeing. So really appreciate your willingness to share those details and ask some questions too. So thank you, and please do let us know if we can be of help in any way. We view ourselves as a resource to you and the industry, and we're happy to make those connections. But again, thank you all very much. Please feel free to contact Grace if you have any questions. Of course, she's beat me to that and put it in the chat already. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.